Looks like we're live. Let me just get all this social media stuff set up so I don't have to worry about this later. Because we're going to be talking for what is probably going to be a very, very long time, as these things typically end up going. This is a completely experimental thing that I have never tried before, so we're going to kind of wing it. But essentially what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to go through all of my pieces top to bottom and explain why I did certain things and how I did certain things and the techniques behind like certain spots in the music, because people learn, and I, as like a means of almost like keeping the foundation with myself, I feel like it might be a good idea to just like make sure that I know what the heck that I'm talking about by talking about everything inside this piece, rather than just assuming that I know everything and then finding that I struggle with foundations later. So I guess I'll start with the instrumentation. So, like I said earlier with the pulse here, that's a weird kind of mouse doubling thing, but that doesn't particularly matter. We have the volume that you can adjust from 0 to 15, which is all well and good, but you can also adjust it within the F to 0 in these volume fields being here. It is far easier to do it within the instrument since you only have to touch it the one time. Wow, that is actually very handy for streaming. I'll have to keep that up for next time. So in this case, we have the same kind of concept where it hits hard and then tapers down to kind of mirror a kick drum. And then I also have a bit of pitch tuning, since you typically have a different pitch to a drum when you hit it versus when it sustains. Kind of like due to the surface area changing, I guess, is like the best explanation that I could give. My understanding of like the science involved is not particularly refined, but I do know that the start of the pitch of a drum is not the same as the end of a pitch of a drum, because the mass does change. So that's why I made this quick pitch judgment to do low to high. You can do high to low if you just want to have some variation, but just making that adds a lot of kick to it if you play it back. Let's see, that's 1, so it should be the first one. Oh, it's the only one I didn't, so there. It's a nice little punch to that. See if I can get the piano on. Versus, let's turn it off. Sounds like it has like an actual hit to it, which is nice. So that's the reasoning there. Hi-hat is literally just trying to kind of mirror the same thing, except in kind of a different frequency range and higher. The arpeggio being 10 here. What does that actually do? That might not do much of anything other than raise the pitch. Yeah, that pretty much just raises the pitch, which I guess we are also trying to do here. So we're just making it super high in order to mirror hi-hat, which makes sense. It means that any note I would have hit here would have been hi-hat. Nope. Maybe I would just pull on something out of my butt there. Entirely possible. Let's see what happens. Oh yeah, could have totally done it without that. Anyway, at the very minimum, the volume was important here to keep it in this section. Non-punchy noise is just this without the ARP, yada, yada, yada. A lot of these are self-explanatory. chord pluck is interesting in that it is trying to make a full chord with one note, and that we have 0, 3, 7 as the tonic, and then the third, and then the fifth of the chord, and then that just all comes at once. So if I go to the pulse, which is where this would be. If we turn this off, kind of makes it easier to hear. See? So it's essentially trying to get the full chord without actually getting the entire chord played at once. It's kind of cheating, but you kind of do it that way in tracker music in general, just because, you know, you got to find interesting ways to do things. So other than that, everything else is pretty self-explanatory. We have like the major chord, the dominant chord, diminished chord, sol. It's just a sol. Duty pulse, just to mirror the duty in where's sustain, I believe. Yeah, duty sustain here. So nothing super complicated in those windows. Now I actually get to the theory. So overall, everything for the first 4 measures is supposed to be just one chord. It'll obviously mirror occasionally between this and a dominant just due to the nature of being in the chord of having, like the tonic chord is built off of the tonic, the third, and the dominant. For people who don't understand, who don't like know music theory, that essentially just means the first note of the chord being the A, the third note of the chord being the C, and the fifth note of the chord being the E. So we have the tonic for A, the median, no, not, God, now I'm forgetting my terminology. No, what the heck do we even call this? I gotta be accurate here. It is the median. Okay. I am remembering it. Good. So you have the tonic, the median, and the dominant. And the way in which you go between tonic to dominant chords is often mirrored when you just play the tonic as the entire chord, just because it's the nature of the chord to include the tonic and the dominant in it. So you have instances where you have the E and the A kind of implying the chord change. Also octave jumps, helping me make it seem as if I'm changing the chord without actually changing the chord at all. That is a way I typically like to try and write something with nothing. It's nice. The melody itself was something that I wrote in FL Studio, a different software, in which I wrote the whole thing, and then I realized that I was going to have to write it in Chip, and then rearranged it in this later. So I knew what all the chords were going to be when I came in, but when I was writing it at the time, I had to kind of experiment, as you do with chords sometimes. So as far as the chord structure for all the way up through here onwards, this was all something I had previously written, but the reasoning as to why these chord changes are going, there are a lot of like predetermined chord progressions that you can use based off of theory. Here, we were using G minor, so this is going to C major because it is not the dominant, it's the minor chord instead, which is shared in C major, so that allows us to make this progression coming up. So C major. We kind of do a similar trick here with what our previous progression was. So we went from the C major to the 4. Let's just go through this now. New progression here. All these notes. We got our C major to our fourth. This is our D minor. And then we go to our 5th. Yep. Then goes back to C, I believe. Let's see here. Not quite. Hold on. Let me just make sure I'm not leading you astray. The intention was C, but I think we did something else. We'll have to go into that later. And then we have back into minor. So we go from our related C major key into A minor. There may be some secondary keys in here. Chords, rather. Used to make the progression. But the general consensus is because we use a shared chord, we can go into A minor whenever you want. And because A minor and C major shared keys, we can do that with pretty much anything. That's just kind of the power of using any kind of shared key, is that you can go into the relative key with pretty much anything, as long as you prepare it with some time. So now we're in the minor, which then prepares us to go back to the start where we're in minor again. So that's like the basis of everything in this for like the chord structure. It's not particularly hard. It's just some principles you need to know when it comes to making cadences and why you can do certain things and why you typically don't do other things. A lot of the stuff before and later is kind of just up to preference. Like the whole like diminished thing, you could easily do, instead of diminished, you could have put this into the 4th. That's a thing that people like to do. They like to do the 5/4. What's this? The 1/4/5/1 chord. That's like the most stereotypical pop progression you're ever going to see. It has been passed down from generation to generation, even from when Beethoven and Bach were making chords. They're like, this is pretty good, and here we are. But there are other progressions that also work because of the shared notes between. Shared notes is typically a means of which making chord progressions easier. In this case, because A minor is A, C, E, and B diminished is B, D, F, it gets a little hard, but because there's stepwise motion, it's not too bad. And then we have G major, which is G, B, and D, and you can see how easy that is. It's literally one note change. A minor, again, literally stepwise motion. As long as you're not making like crazy big jumps between too many notes at any given time, voicing ends up being pretty easy, to which you can just make stepwise changes to everything and be okay. But that's just me being lazy, I guess. You could do something like instead of ACE, you could do like what I will sometimes do is instead of B diminished, I would do B major, which would be B, D sharp, and then F sharp. Again, it's all about setup and your intention with the chord. In that case, what I will typically do is go down to the minor and then up to the dominant. There's definitely some clever ways in which you can make some progressions that don't seem super outlandish. It just has to be mindful as to what the heck is going on and what rules you can't break. The rules in which you can't break are, for most music theory, no parallel fourths or fifths. What that means is if you have an A and an E next to each other, they better as heck not be going to an E and an A or move in the same direction, essentially. I get to make that, to illustrate that point better. Let's say the progression of this A is to E. It goes from A to E. And then you have this E below it, which is going to an A above it. So then that means that because these are both going the same direction, this is not okay. What we can do to change that is to then go the opposite direction to where this E goes down to the lower A, while this A goes up to the higher E. That makes it so that the fourths and fifths are not parallel, which is what we did with voicing before, so that we can use this properly. Things that are also okay are, as far as like parallel, you can do parallel seconds, thirds, sixths. Parallel diminished or I guess you call it tritone. Parallel tritones are generally not okay. But some people, like myself, will do it anyway because we're rebels. But generally, voicing, no doing this unless you are actually planing. Planing is the technique where everything goes parallel, which is what a lot of easy keyboards will use, where we go from just like one chord to a next chord and just keep going. That's how I wrote the initial part of this music, because I just planed everything because I don't got to deal with voicing that way. But in this case, we actually deal with voicing. And if we look here, the way that this A and E go next to each other is we have A to A, B, which is a second. Then we go down to the E. And the A goes down while the A and the bass goes down while the actual melody goes up, as you can kind of hear. So that's like the method as to how we make the voices sound separate. You can hear it through. Right now, this is breaking a roll. And that way, do parallel. Well, no, this isn't technically breaking the roll. They're like a minor second next to each other. And in my world of music, an octave jump does not count when it comes to parallel motion. If you make it still an E when it goes down, it is the same note. That is at least how I write. It's maybe not necessarily correct with theory, but it is how I roll. Is that this E going to this E is okay. And you can find stuff like that throughout like, the whole song. It's not like, I'm not gonna say this is like theoretic perfection, because it's not. But there are a lot of rules being abided by here, and there are a lot of rules being broken here, and there was some intent with most of what I did. So let's see. We've rambled on about chord structure for some time now. So we got down this stuff. To best describe what is going on here, I think it's best to call this ornamentation. Once we get to something where we're playing notes not because they're necessarily correct. It's more as a means of expressing the note that we played rather than staying within key, if that makes any sense. And typically I will try and at least make it so that we are at least close to what we started with and within the same key, unless there's some kind of specific effect, like, I don't know, like something like that. In that case, obviously the higher sharp D off of the D that we were going off of is not in the same key, because that is not in the key of A or C, but in either case, it is still fine in the context of ornamentation. It can even lead to kind of counting that as like part of the chord, which makes it, I guess, kind of fancy, but not really. I still kind of count that in the terms of, like, if you go like that at the top of your A, it's still pretty much just an A chord with a little bit of ornamentation on top. You could call it flat 9, but it's in my mind still just an A, because you really did not do that much. In any case, that little barrel is just me expressing the note and not trying to remove myself from the key. This, I would say, is also kind of the same vein, this vibrato here. It's just a means of expressing the note and nothing else. Now, when it comes to other stuff we can talk about, let's go as far as the percussion lines go. So the accent of the beat is something that I had written before in the earlier piece. Might as well just get that now. Let's just get what we wrote before. Here we go. So it was the same beats that I had used in the original, and I want to kind of allude to that. Means of the hi-hat were just to make it seem higher tempo. That's all. So we use that beat and rhythm to allude to what we had written before, and we use the hi-hats to make it seem like it's faster than it actually is. It's actually a pretty slow piece, all things considered. Pretty slow quarter note. But that's basically all the noise. Like, there's nothing else to the noise other than just use the hi-hat to make it sound fast. Play the bass notes on 1 and 2. No, 1 and 3. And then you're done. I typically don't like to overthink my percussion spots, because I am a percussionist, and I know if you overthink those sorts of things, they just make it worse than they already are a lot of the time. I will overthink only in cases when I'm trying to use ornamentation, like in this case. But outside of that, I will keep things normal. And then we talk about our bass line again. Oop. Hold on. So we have our pedal tone. we have the remainder of the bass line going through this ornamentation here based off of what our melody is. This is meant to... The progression is more implied in here, in this lower note, whereas the higher note is meant to play off of the melody. At least that's how I design it. Also, there may be some planing in this spot. I'm pretty sure, because that's how I had done it before. And planing being parallel motion within stuff. But this goes through the same progression that we went through with our notepad. Nothing is different. Now we have ornamentation on the right, along with accompanying stuff. And that's the bass line. Nothing too complicated. I guess we can talk about accompaniment, since that kind of comes into a bit more voicing stuff. Let's see here. So we have this. This is all voicing based off of counterpoint and contrary motion. Basic counterpoint in a nutshell is more along the lines of just use contrary motion, dummy, and make things interesting by trying to separate the duration a little bit between the two, so they sound kind of different but kind of the same. So we do this thing here where, in order to make this more interesting, we play the note 4 times. And then for this motion here, this is all parallel thirds, I believe. Oh, no, not quite. It's parallel second. There's some contrary motion in there. No, this is parallel, but it's not fifths, and it's not fourths, so we're okay. You can hear here where we have this G and this D, which is a fifth. Make them go different directions. Now we add our 3 voices here. Which is essentially doing the same thing that we did with the 2 voices, but with 3. We have an E, a C, and an A to make the full chord. The A moves up, whereas the E should move down. So we have contrary motion, which is good. That's what you're supposed to do. All right, so let's play through the whole thing and see if I can think of anything else. can't think of anything else. So I think this is just going to be a short stream, short experimental stream. See how we go.